I'd like to call the November 20th council meeting to order. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Carey,
Present.
Chilson,
Present.
Hutchings,
Here.
Nelson,
Present.
Parker,
Yes, I'm here.
Wackler,
Present.
Kincaid.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and the consent agenda? Thank you, Councilmember Carey and Councilmember Hutchings. Are there any changes to the agenda or the consent agenda? Councilmember Chilson.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. At the request of administration, I would like to remove Resolution 2024-038 from the consent agenda, and I would move to postpone it until the December 18th meeting at the request of the coach.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you, Councilmember Carey. Are there any council objections to postponing Resolution 2024-038 until the December 18th meeting? Seeing none, that resolution is postponed until December 18th. Are there any other changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Seeing none, would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
October 23rd, 2024, council meeting minutes. Ordinance 2024-036, amending Soldotna Municipal Code, Section 2.28110, jury duty and bereavement leave, and enacting Section 2.28115, bereavement leave, sponsored by the city manager. Public hearing on December 18th. Ordinance 2024-037, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $2,900 in the general fund for a donation received from the Soldotna Library Friends, sponsored by the city manager. Public hearing on December 18th. Ordinance 2024-038, amending Soldotna Municipal Code, Chapter 3.16, lodging tax, Section 3.0 or 3.08030, borough collection of sales, marijuana, and lodging tax payment in full, and Sections 1.08.080, minor offense fines schedule, sponsored by Councilmember Parker. Public hearing on December 18th. Ordinance 2024-039, amending Soldotna Municipal Code, Section 16.10.040, review and approval, and 1710-425, public hearings to implement a new public hearing notice method by requiring sign postings for certain public hearings and housekeeping changes for clarity and consistency on public notice requirements, sponsored by the city manager. Public hearing on December 18th. Resolution 2024-039, authorizing the purchase of a used Vector for the street department in the amount of $198,000 and authorizing direct negotiations as provided by Soldotna Municipal Code 3.06.060B3, sponsored by the city manager. Action Memorandum 2024-019, approving the 2025 board and commission ex officio appointments, sponsored by the mayor. Action Memorandum 2024-020, approving the 2025 city council meeting schedule, sponsored by the city clerk. That is your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? Looking in the audience, I see no hands raised. Are there any remote attendees wishing to speak, Madam Clerk?
There are no remote attendees.
There are no remote attendees wishing to speak. Having no one wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. We've approved the minutes, public comment, and presentations. There are no members of the public in the audience, so I would say there's no one here to speak on any item that's not on the agenda. And we have no remote attendees, correct?
Correct.
All right. Assembly and legislative reports, we have none. That brings us to item 6, public hearings. Resolution 2024-040, adopting the Hazard Mitigation Plan 2024 that's been sponsored by the city manager. May I have a motion to adopt? Thank you, Councilmember Carey. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilman Chilson. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. The planning department has been hard at work on this, so I'm going to ask Director Mitchell and Associate Planner Hester to provide the report.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director Mitchell.
So this resolution is to adopt the hazard mitigation plan update. The last time we had it was, definitely. Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to give a brief overview of our hazard mitigation plan and what it's about, and then I'm going to pass it along to Associate Planner to talk about the contents of the plan itself. So mitigation is an action to reduce and eliminate the impacts to life, property, and the environment due to hazards. And the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 requires hazard mitigation planning in order to receive federal grants or eligibility. The last time the city received a grant was back in 2021. For limited hazard tree removal at several parks, and that was in the amount of $165,000. So having a current plan means that we're eligible for future grant opportunities. And it expires every 5 years. So our expiration date is unfortunately coming up here in the next month, and this is why you're seeing it in a very short turnaround. Due to the grant that we receive for FEMA in terms of consulting, they're behind about 2 cycles. Meaning, even though earlier this year in February, we got a letter from the state saying that we got a grant for consulting purposes, we're not going to see that fund until a few more years out. Therefore, this process and update has been done in-house. And I have been fortunate enough for Associate Planner Hester to kind of spearhead this while I focus on other priorities. So with this, I just want to give a brief overview with our current hazard mitigation plan. It was last updated in 2019. But it wasn't adopted by your council until 2021. FEMA took almost 2 years to review and give a pre-adoption approval. And so the reason why this process looks a little different in the past, where in the past we have done a draft plan and we would submit it to the state and FEMA for review, this time around, we're adopting the plan first and then submitting it to FEMA. The reason is I consulted with the state hazard mitigation planner, and it was recommended that by adopting it before submitting has a chance of leading to an approval sooner. So therefore, this is the reason why we're doing things a little different. And also, if you notice our plan expiration date, if our plan was updated in 2019, but it wasn't adopted in 2021, the 5-year cycle should have ended a little bit 2 years out. Unfortunately, in the past, we have always kind of piggybacked off in the boroughs plan. So that means that every time our plan expired or the boroughs plan expired, we had that same date because there were elements in our plan that we had referred back to the borough. So just a little history on that. So the adoption of this plan will be submitted to the state after adoption of this resolution, and it will be a standalone plan. We'll no longer follow suit of the boroughs plan because they recently just adopted their updated hazard mitigation plan just like last week. And they've only incorporated 2 other cities. They do intend that when they do their next cycle update in 2029, that they will open the opportunity to other cities, including City of Kenai and City of Soldotna, which means potentially the borough can be leading this effort in the future if that's a direction that the city wants to go. So a little bit about, so ultimately that's the gist of where we are with our hazard mitigation plan and why we're doing an update, because our plan expires December 15, 2024. And so upon this adoption of this resolution, I do want to note that in your resolution section 3, there is a very specific language because we are adopting before submitting that any required revisions prior to approval by FEMA, we don't have to go back to City Council for adoption or resolution because staff will be only making the required revisions by the state. After FEMA approves a plan, any changes then would require an adopted resolution to reflect those changes. So I do want to point that out in your resolution. Other than that, I'm going to pass the torch here to Associate Planner Hester to talk about the details and contents of the plan itself.
Before Jennifer, you talk, are there any questions for Linda? I had one quick question, Linda. So you mentioned in the resolution, there's a provision that if FEMA makes changes, it automatically gets incorporated. What if what FEMA is proposing is inconsistent with our code?
Thank you for that question. It was a very good question, Vice Mayor Parker. So the way we updated this plan, we follow their planning review tool, which is the same checklist that FEMA uses to approve the plan. So we follow to the T. Staff is not anticipating that FEMA is going to ask us to change the content, mostly when we follow their checklist line by line item. But of course, if there's a major content update, I think it would be administration to bring back to City Council to update, adopt a new resolution to reflect that major change so that the public is notified of it. I think we're going to gauge it. If there are minor changes in terms of more technical, but doesn't change the context, then those can be changed accordingly. But if it's a major update, staff will bring back to administration to bring back to your council for consideration of how to move forward.
Okay, thank you. FEMA is known for changing the rules without notifying anybody that they've changed the rules and just go ahead. So be careful as you move forward with them.
Thank you.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Because this plan is quite lengthy, we created a PowerPoint that summarizes it in an appropriate amount of time for the council's review. And we can go ahead and skip this. This is the cover that we created for the plan. And then that was the FEMA. Okay, so for the purpose of the plan, it's to prevent and reduce the loss of life, injury, and property damage, prevent and reduce the damage to public infrastructure, integrate hazard mitigation planning in our departments, council, and committees, work with surrounding communities and agencies, as well as educate the community about hazard mitigation, including outreach and engagement. Next slide, please. The development of this update was a collaborative effort between the city, other agencies, and the public. City staff updated the hazard risk assessments with mitigation strategies, reviewed critical facilities, analyzed any newly produced documents, revisited the 2019 goals, and added new mitigation projects. We also coordinated with a core group of municipal and local officials in an as-needed ongoing basis during this draft. And this included the State Forestry, the Kenai Peninsula Borough, the Kenai River Center, FEMA, NOAA, NRCS, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Regarding public outreach, this is highly valued by FEMA and only increasingly more so than what we saw in 2019 with an emphasis on it. So the city did create more public outreach than we had previously in the iterations before. We created a public survey, and those survey results can be seen in Appendix B. There were 24 responses to that survey. We also advertised on Facebook and the city's website, hosted an open house at the library on October 10th. The feedback that we gathered helped shape the plan and the goals. Next slide, please. Hazard analysis consists of identifying natural events that may threaten Soldotna. FEMA requires the description of the nature of the hazard, the location, the disaster history, the extent and the severity, and the probability of future events. This plan does not take into account any man-made, economic, technological, or terrorism-related hazards. And the hazards that were looked at in 2024 are the list on the screen. What differs from the 2019 is tsunami. Tsunami actually, data was recently published that shows at the maximum extent, the most technologically slightest potential, Soldotna does actually have a few areas that are impacted. And then also climate change. Climate change is another aspect of this update that was of more importance to FEMA than they had placed previously. So we looked at climate change in relation to certain other hazards. And those three hazards are flooding, wildland fire, and weather. So climate change isn't a specific section, but it's incorporated into those three other hazards. And we'll look at each hazard one by one, as well as then reflect on the goals that city staff created for that. Okay, next slide, please. The first hazard is flooding. Floods can be associated when people and properties are affected. Flooding damage occurs when humans interfere with the natural process by altering waterways or building within the floodplain. In September 2012, damage to the infrastructure of the Kenai River Center was associated with wide-scale flooding. And the borough actually came into an acquirement of the Federal Declaration for Public Assistance. And then the following year, during an extended storm and rainfall event in September and October, the K Beach area experienced high surface and groundwater conditions, also resulting in Federal Declaration for Public Assistance to the borough. Just last year, the Kenai River has significant areas of flooding as well that we saw in the city. The areas most prone to flooding in the city are along the riverbank, but there are two tributaries, both Slycock and Soldotna Creek, that saw an increase in the FEMA hazard mapping. And next slide. The map on top is the most recent FEMA hazard mapping that was just kind of published preliminary this year. There are 4 goals that we came up with associated with flooding. And the major difference between 2019 and this draft is that we incorporated Slycock Creek and Soldotna Creek. The area in green on Soldotna Creek and Slycock Creek, they expanded quite a bit compared to what FEMA had published in their hazard floodplain mapping previously. We are fairly lucky as a city as a whole because most of our structures are built on a bluff that is protected from the floodway. So just to go through the first 3 goals, these are actually almost verbatim what was in the 2019 plan. The first one is to continue to review development proposals within the Kenai River Overlay District to ensure compliance with regulations and control for erosion and adverse activity within the riparian habitat. These proposals typically are administrative, but we do have a few every year that are conditional use permits that come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The second is to review the existing KROD code in our municipal code to determine its adequacy in addressing building standards near the Kenai River. The third is something that we really dived into in the past 2 years as FEMA was updating their hazard mapping, is whether or not the city should participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, determine which additional city resources would be required to adopt and adequately manage a floodplain management ordinance. Ultimately, it was decided against this because there are such few structures that would even be eligible for the insurance. But that is still something to have on the radar and just to have as should we ever opt into it, just continue to consider as new documentation and research is provided by the federal government. And then lastly is a new goal. It's to investigate if additional regulations should be placed for Soldotna and Slycock Creek. This is because not only that we see an increase from the FEMA flood hazard mapping, but also the planning department, we saw an increased number of subdivisions of large tracts of land within Soldotna Creek and Slycock Creek's watershed. And just taking a look at that, taking a step back and asking, will those subdivisions result in more development? And does that development need any other oversight? Next slide, please. The second hazard is wildland fire, sometimes referred to as wildfire. Firefighter and public safety are the primary concern for each local fire agency's response. And each year, between 600 and 800 wildland fires burn across Alaska, causing extensive damage. Wildland fires on the Kenai Peninsula are usually human-caused, accounting for 98% of fire ignitions locally. However, lightning strikes have increased in frequency in recent years, with numerous strikes recorded in 2005, resulting in 22 detected fires. In 2019, the Swan Lake Fire was started by a lightning strike and burned over 100,000 acres. In 2015, the Card Street Fire burned over 8,000 acres. And in 2014, the Funny River Fire burned nearly 200,000 acres. Although no properties within city limits were affected, emergency management teams utilized city resources such as the airport and our sports center for transportation and staging. In addition to just normal fire activity, we are seeing an increased amount of risk because of the spruce bark beetle epidemic. Since the mid-1970s, spruce bark beetles have killed about 50% of the mature spruce trees on the Kenai Peninsula's forested land. The infestation reached epidemic levels in the 1990s, and wildland fire risk has only increased since then with increased urban development. Within the past 3 years, it's kind of hard to see. It's better in the PDF in your packet, but in the past 3 years, the city has devoted a lot of time, energy, and resources into the mitigation of these fuels, of hazardous fuels, of the standing dead trees on city-owned land and public land. And that was in partnership with the Division of Forestry. And like Director Mitchell said, we did receive a grant that was possible because of an updated plan. The treatments included parks and non-developed forested areas within the city's ownership. And then the next slide goes into the goals that are going to be reflected. The first 4 goals are, again, very similar to what was in the 2019 plan. The first one, to reduce the amount of hazardous fuels around Soldotna, provide fire breaks in and around Soldotna, including with the refuge, and work with the refuge, the borough, and the state to identify projects. This one is probably the most notable success, I would say, of the goals from the 2019 plan, the one that we have had the most work done with, and that you can actually see a tangible result. The second is to promote education and awareness among homeowners about wildland fires, structural ignition, and mitigation steps that individuals can implement by providing information on the FireWise program during the building permit and the zoning permit process. The third, ensure defensible areas surrounding vital city public facilities by clearing brush and other wildland fire fuels. And then the fourth, this is new. This is somewhat based on Chief Escott's feedback, as well as talking with streets and maintenance, is evaluate ingress and egress to the city and if it should be considered for an upgrade as an evacuation option, such as for wildland fire evacuation. And then the next hazard on the next slide, thank you, is earthquakes. Alaska is the most seismically active state and one of the most active regions in the world. About 11% of the world's earthquakes happen here. On average, as a state, we experience one great earthquake, which is a magnitude of 8 or higher every 14 years, and one earthquake with a magnitude of 7 to 8 every year. Earthquakes can cause ground failures. During the 1964 earthquake, lateral spread ground failures damaged over 200 bridges, and flow failures harmed port facilities in Seward, Valdez, and Whittier. Saturated clay soils can also cause major landslides. In January 2016, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck approximately 50 miles west of Anchor Point, which caused some damage to the city. Retail stores experienced disruption to business with fallen stock and shelves. A citywide damage assessment was conducted to verify conditions. Outside city limits, additional damages occurred on K Beach as the road suffered cracked pavement, resulting in a temporary closure of the road. A gas leak in Kenai led to 2 separate explosions, which burned 4 homes and 3 vehicles. No injuries were reported due to an evacuation of the affected area. As Soldotna is located in a seismically active zone and is vulnerable to damage from earthquakes, there is a moderate risk of damage to all areas of Soldotna from a severe earthquake, and there is risk of damage to buildings and infrastructure during major earthquake activity. And then the next slide goes into the goals. These are fairly similar to the one seen in 2019, again, with the exception of the last 2. So the first 4, are identify the city facilities critical to area residents, determine retrofits or backup systems needed to protect the structures in the event of an earthquake, provide generators to operate, supply well pumps at well E, continue to work to provide standby generators to operate vital facilities. And this was also highlighted by Chief Escott and his department, in that as the planned relocation of the fire station number 1 goes across the way, that they're worried about potentially having some type of issue in the future. So this is probably of the forefront of our goals, is to take a look and make sure that our police department is taken care of. The fourth is to investigate alternative water, sewer, utility line crossing for the Kenai River other than the Sterling Highway Bridge. That's from utility standpoint, it's better for public utilities to be looped. One of the new ones to see is list earthquake preparedness resources and locations of shelter facilities on our website or in collaboration with the borough. Also, Chief Escott provided us as a first responders kind of and just a local citizen a very detailed resource kit list. And so that was taken into account. And then lastly is to investigate if inspections of the bridge are necessary. And that was an additional concern from the police department. And then the next slide is volcanoes. We have a few historically active volcanoes. Each volcano has the year that it had last had activity on that map. It is kind of hard to see. During the last eruption of Redoubt, ashfall affected all areas of the city depending on wind direction in the day. Volcanic ash can spread across the central and southern Kenai Peninsula, causing soil damage, power outages, and traffic disruptions. In extreme cases, it can damage buildings and disrupt power, water, and communication systems. The aviation industry is especially at risk during eruptions due to the dangers of volcanic ash in the air. Alaska has a large amount of air traffic, including trans-Pacific and intrastate flights that pass near or over 52 active volcanoes. To manage this risk, there are strong communication and warning systems between the Alaska Volcano Observatory, aviation authorities, and the airline industry, which has become even more important as air traffic has increased in the Cook Inlet region in recent years. Volcanic ash can be harmful to health and damage equipment, and during strong winds, this can become a health risk as well. Prior iterations of this plan did not address any volcano goals specifically. The police department did talk about air intake systems in the city, and that goal will be addressed as an overarching hazard goal at the end. And so there's no goals for this one. So next slide, we'll just jump into severe weather. Severe weather, the major difference between this hazard analysis and previous one is for high winds. High winds wasn't mentioned previously, but due to a good amount of public comments, both during our open house and from the survey, high winds was mentioned often. And this was why we decided to incorporate it into this plan. Severe weather events often affect large areas well beyond Soldotna, pose serious risk to life and property. These events can disrupt utilities, transportation, and communication systems. And then the next slide will have the goals. And so these goals are somewhat similar to what we saw before. The first two are very similar to what was in 2019, and the last two are new. So the first one, increase public awareness of severe weather events and mitigation through posting information about educational programs such as Winter Weather Awareness Week, the Tsunami Alert System, and Flood Awareness Week on our webpage and social media outlets. I think in the past 5 years, we failed to do this, but that can be now in the forefront of something that we, every once in a while, if we need a news item, go back on. Promote awareness of 511alaska.gov through our city webpage and social media outlets, and encourage drivers to use the service to check road conditions before utilizing the Seward or Sterling highways for long distance trips. Then the third one is a new one. Investigate assistance with beetle kill tree removal around power lines, easements, and residential homes. This was based on public input as well as the police department and in public works. And then lastly, investigate more efficient routes of snow removal operations and machinery. The police department also gave examples in our conversations of squad cars and other first responding vehicles, ambulances being stuck in the snow at times during heavy snowfall. And is there a way that we can partner with maybe GIS within our city to determine, are there more efficient routes of snow removal for first responder safety? And then the next slide, this is the new one too, is tsunamis. Again, historically, we really hadn't considered at being a risk of tsunami due to our elevation in the banks of the river, the distance from Cook Inlet, but due to a data, we realized that there are a portion of our city that could be at risk at maximum inundation levels. However, we did not have any goals specific to tsunamis. And so the next slide is going to detail, these are all new goals, completely new for the 2024 draft. And this are in part based on some of the borough's goals, so we can help assist them in their efforts, as well as some of the general goals that we heard from interdepartment as well as the public. So the first one is to protect city employees with continued and expanded hazard mitigation training and facility upgrades. The police department made a point that if we have to kind of take care of our first responders and our own before we can start helping other people. I kind of think about that as when you're on a flight, you put on your own mask before you help the people around you. The second one is identify and map congregate living facilities and institutions with special need populations such as assisted living facilities, daycare centers, rehab facilities, senior housing. Some of this information may not be suitable for the public. The third is to identify areas of seasonal populations such as campgrounds, RV parks, plan for their notification or alert of an applicable hazard event, and plan for their evacuation. The fourth, identify and protect public and private resource facilities such as water sources, the wastewater treatment plant, cell towers, and power stations. The previous utility director, Mike Allen, did mention that we also need to go through and make sure that some of this data isn't public, because in light of some of the post 9/11 protocol, he does believe that our maps might have, sensitive information. So that's another tied in goal with that one. Verify that all critical function structures and available fuel supplies have alternative sources during power outages. This was also brought to us by the police department, making sure that our generators and our vehicles have fuel supplies. Promote awareness of registration of cell phones to receive the borough emergency alerts, and we can do that through our webpage and our social media outlets. Assemble a prioritized list of facilities owned by the city to identify changes, non-structural measures, evaluations of facilities, and upgrades or retrofits needed to meet current hazard standards and state building code. Consider air filter and intake improvements. And then lastly, investigate working with the borough to determine the need for developing emergency protocols. And then that is the end of the summary that we have of the 2024 draft plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that excellent report. Before I ask council members for comments, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing no one in chambers, do we have anybody online yet? All right, bring it back to council. Are there any council member comments or questions about the hazard mitigation plan? Councilmember Carey?
Thank you. I found it extremely helpful, and I thank both of you and the work of staff. Currently, and again, under the earthquake topic, it was saying that it would work on investigating inspection of the bridge as necessary after an earthquake. Who has that responsibility today? And I understand we're talking about developing it, but who today, if there was a significant earthquake, who would have the responsibility to investigate whether or not there needs to be an inspection?
Thank you, Councilmember Carey. Through the Vice Mayor, that's the State of Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. And they do have a bridge inspection program. And we really should reach out and just get the latest data to ensure that they're, addressing that bridge that's most important to us as well.
Yes, follow up.
Thank you, please. I want to say I am most appreciative of the work that's being done to assist residential seasonal residents, because it would seem to me, those of us who live here, we have a pretty good knowledge of what's where. However, for during the summer especially, there could be many people here that if there was one of these types of incidents, they would be very befuddled as to what to do. And so I think the priority I'm hearing is being focused on assisting with that clientele, that group. I think is very important because they could be very much at risk. And again, I thank you for the work that's being done.
Okay. Councilmember Chilson.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. At the request of administration, I would move to amend the resolution 2024-040 by adding Appendix C to the hazard mitigation plan and making the necessary revisions to properly include the new appendix in the plan as outlined in the amendment memo.
Is there a second? Councilmember Carey. Any questions? What is Appendix C called? Go ahead, Jennifer or Linda.
I can answer. The Appendix C is titled Survey Results.
All right, thank you. Are there any objections to adoption of this amendment? Seeing none, that's back before. Are there any additional council comments? Yes, Councilmember Chilson.
Amendment aside, I just wanted to commend staff on the excellent work putting this plan together. I was surprised by the level of thoroughness that went into it. And it's just, a lot of this is, incorporating aspects of our life that we would normally think about and how it could potentially be negatively impacted. And it's reassuring to know the level of preparation that the city is putting into this in collaboration with the borough. And I hope that we continue to see that collaboration expanded. So again, thank you for all the excellent work. Very thorough report.
Any additional comments or questions from council members? Seeing none. Clerk, please call the roll. This is on the main motion as amended.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Kincaid.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Thank you. And that brings us to item 7, new business, and that is all on the consent agenda. Item 8, mayor and council reports. Mayor Whitney, did you have anything that you wanted to report on?
I won't mention what the temperature is here. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I'm glad that you made it there safely. We have no proclamations, council reports on boards and commissions. We have Councilmember Chilson on the November 7th Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting.
Thank you. I do have a brief report on this. So the main item on the agenda for the November 7th meeting was consideration of changes to the structure of the advisory board and the frequency of their meetings. So after some discussion, the board did make the recommendation to keep 7 members as the number of members for that body, but increase the limit on how many members can be from outside the city limits from 2 to 3. And then additionally, they used to be set on a quarterly schedule. And then at some point in the recent past, they transitioned to meeting every other month. And then I think at this point, what they're looking at doing is transitioning back to quarterly with the option to add more as needed. They do not have the authority to make those changes as a board, though. These are structures that are defined in Soldotna Municipal Code. So they will be making a recommendation. I suspect at some point in the near future, we'll see a proposal to change that code brought back before the council. Additionally, we got some updates on the sports center and the construction of the field house and all the activities going over there. So if you've been over there before the snow hit, you would have seen that all the paving is done. One of the things they did differently with that is there's a number of trenches that are essentially cut throughout the parking lot. And the idea being that allows dissipation of the water on the property rather than having it to just run off and go to the adjoining properties. Not necessarily the most sightly things, but they're going to be working on adding some grass and trees to kind of make them a little bit more presentable this next spring. Additionally, we got to see some designs for acoustic panels that are going to be installed in the field house. Very beautiful. I love the orange and the blue aesthetic they're going with. It all ties into the river theme that we're going with on that, and should provide really effective sound suppression so that we don't have just a horrible echo effect in that building for large events. And then from previous work sessions that you might have attended on the field house, one of the design goals for the inside was the incorporation of a modular plastic floor. They're actually looking at transitioning this to a wooden floor instead of a plastic one, which would be much more durable. So that was kind of the list of highlights. Nothing really else other than that. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Councilmember Chilson? Seeing none, thank you so much for that report. That brings us to item 9 on the agenda. We have the report from our acting city manager.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'll be very brief. As noted in the report in the packet, we're monitoring the CDS FY25 projects, and whether or not those will be passed in Congress and become available to us. So there's a little notation in that of interest, but that's something that we're eagerly waiting to see if we get significant funding for the upgrades of Marydale, as well as our Wellhouse C. And then the last thing I'll add that's not in the packet is just a recent update. I was in the field house today. Our construction team is continuing to make significant progress. We're framing walls, roughing in electrical, mechanical, plumbing. Painters are in there and giant scissor lifts in the ceiling painting. We poured concrete yesterday in the mezzanine above. Yes, in this temperature, it's not bad in there. We've got heat going, and we're starting to hang sheetrock. So we're really moving along at the field house. It's pretty exciting. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for the acting city manager? Seeing none, that brings us down to public comments. I see no one in the audience that was here to speak. We have no remote attendees other than the city mayor. So that brings us down to council comments, and we will start with Councilmember Kincaid.
Oh, 1 second, I had some notes. For things going on at So High, at our Soldotna High School, one big thing that we've had going on is our food drive. So there's still a public ability to donate up until this Friday afternoon. So at least tomorrow, I'm not quite sure who's all counting, but if you guys want to donate, you guys can still donate tomorrow until about 3 p.m. We also have our Grease showing of Grease the musical from in December December 5th through 7th. If you guys wanted to go watch, our theater program during school and after school has been working hard on that. We also will be hosting an arts and crafts fair on the 23rd. And for sports, we have wrestling going on, starting up, and hockey. And we have our drama debate and forensics team going out, which is a new thing that we've had for the past few years. But they've been having a lot of fun and I think are getting ready to go to state at some point. But I think they're set to do that. Other than that, I don't think we have much going on.
Thank you. We will now go to Councilmember Wackler.
We will be having Thanksgiving before our next meeting, so I just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And I hope you enjoy spending time with your family and snuggling up because it's really cold out.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
No comments tonight.
You're quiet tonight. Councilmember Carey.
Thank you. I have something that could be very significant. About 41 years ago, the United States Congress, in basically a very quiet session, took away up to 2/3 of Social Security payments for anyone who lived in a state that did not pay Social Security as a employee of a state. So that those 18 states, which include California, Massachusetts, Alaska, if you took a retirement, whether it's as a teacher, as a city employee, a fireman, a police officer, again, municipal employee, although you would receive every year from Social Security, because you had different jobs that had paid that, what you would receive when you retired, it was untruthful. Instead, they passed that it would be offset up to 2/3 of your Social Security, even though you paid the same amount as anyone else on that amount of money that was covered by Social Security. When you got your retirement, you would be told, oh, it's been offset. It is part of a windfall profit that we don't want you to have. This past week, the United States House, by an overwhelming vote, 370 to like 75, approved moving forward on that. There are 60, my understanding, there are 62 co-sponsors in the Senate to approve this as well. To override a filibuster in the Senate, it takes 60. So there are already enough co-sponsors to move it forward. There is hope that this can be done before the current congressional term ends. Congressional sessions are for 2 years. If this does pass, it would go into effect starting on January 1st. However, they would pay back from the beginning of the current congressional session. So they would go back to January of 2023 when the current Congress came in session. it makes it very difficult, and many have come to this building as well as other government, speaking of the issue of retaining people and hiring people from outside. Because if they come up here and they're going to work for the city or state, they're going to lose what they have been paying and have paid for and what they're being notified in terms of their Social Security payment. And so I want to, one, let people know there is hope finally. We've met with Senator Murkowski in this chamber twice as a city to talk about that issue among others. And she's been very supportive, but she also always said it will never come for a vote. So I just want to let you know that it seems very positive. At least the information online seems to be that this is something they'd like to do before the current congressional session ends. And so between now and the end of the year, we might see there are 2.8 million people that would be affected. 2.8 million current retirees who have Social Security payments. They are offset by this provision. And so I just hope that everyone will encourage and write letters to members of Congress. This is justice. You've paid for a benefit, but you don't get it because you live in the wrong state that you've taken a retirement for. And so this should help us with hiring people and also retaining people because it's not fair. And I want to say very clearly, it's not fair. Thank you.
So people are encouraged to blanket all members of the United States Senate and encourage them to bring this to a vote. Thank you. Councilmember Chilson.
No comments other than happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. A few comments. A couple of weeks ago, oh, I'm sorry, Linda. I apologize.
Well, I realize I missed the last meeting, so I thought maybe I was being penalized. So everybody have a lovely evening, enjoy the cold weather, and have a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. And you blended it on so well with Councilmember Kincaid that you two just came together. So here a few weeks ago, the Western Municipal League Associations directors from Washington, Oregon, Montana were here in the region they have quarterly meetings where they get together, the executive directors and their presidents, and they were here as the vice president of Alaska Municipal League. They asked me to come to their meetings, and I also had the ability to give them a nice tour, not only of Soldotna, but also parts of the borough and the city of Kenai. And they very, very much loved this area and liked what they saw. We just got back, Mayor Whitney, myself, and the city manager were at National League of Cities last week. It was a very good meeting, very informative, got a lot of great ideas for both the riverfront development plan as well as additional things potentially to do with our regional sports complex. So the National League of Cities meetings are extremely beneficial for the city of Soldotna. And like others, I wish you all very happy Thanksgiving and be safe out on the roads. Brings us down to item 12, executive session. There is none. Meeting announcements. December 4th, 2024, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting will be meeting here in council chambers at 5:30. And the December 18th will be the city council meeting at 6 o'clock. Next regular city council meeting is Wednesday, December 24th at 6 p.m. With that, the November 20th meeting is adjourned.